Welcome everybody. Welcome to the third lecture. I will say right off the bat, this is the one that I feel like maybe is a little bit the most all over the place. So I apologize if it feels that way as well. I'm trying to do a lot of different things, and again, in like a very like overview type of way. And so I think that this is the one where it might be so overview that it's like not actually that helpful. And if that's the case, you'll give me that feedback.
Great. Come on.
Let's go to the first slide. So really like the goal for today is we're having an epistemological conversation. So we are truly having like a how do we view movement conversation today. And like two of the big themes that I want to keep coming back to are these concepts of movement efficiency and movement variability. So we will use these different lenses. So we'll talk about propulsion, we'll talk about gait, we'll talk about center of mass, like a lot of these concepts. A lot of these things, again, they're like a little bit in the clouds today, but it comes back to these two concepts, right? And if you go to the next one, movement efficiency is just like the ability to achieve a task with as little energy expenditure as possible. It's ultimately, like this concept is just revolves around like how humans are kind of designed to move. And as we get more into this concept like propulsion, we'll talk more about that. And then the next one is really about movement variability. So it's like, why are we coaching exercises in specific ways and why not in different ways? Well, it's because we want to be able to utilize different movement strategies and just load as many different tissues across the body as possible. So many people get into issues where they are just loading the same thing over and over and over again. They think that they're doing all these different exercises. The names of the exercise are different, but the actual effect that it's having on the body is very similar. And a lot of that comes back to how we manage the center of our body. And that's a concept we'll talk more about in the future. So this final kind of preamble is more of a question that I think I'll just answer rather than opening up the conversation because we're short on time today. But it's this question of like, why do we care about using gait as a frame of reference rather than, again, there's kind of like, this is something we'll touch on more, but there's these two very like distinct ways of looking at movement as like a muscle-centric versus a gravity-centric, or versus like I would call it like propulsion-centric way of viewing movement. And gait helps us understand, I think, how humans are supposed to move, specifically how we are designed to produce force into the ground, to propel ourselves forward, to displace our center of mass. And then we can use that lens to understand that a lot of our main lower body movements, especially in the closed chain, especially like compound movements, are just exercises in propulsion. And so that like propulsion strategy helps inform a lot of the cueing that we do, and it informs what we're looking for in the exercise. It also helps us kind of look at like certain things that we understand like in a conventional sense as like bad are not actually bad viewed through this lens. And so the next video really hits on that right away. You can see that, so this is, will you full screen? So this is a Chinese Olympic weightlifter. So you can see a squat. This is obviously excellent technique for a squat. You can see he's sitting straight up and straight down. The knees are tracking out slightly. He's got even distribution of weight on his foot. Like the trunk is in a really good position, right? He's just sitting straight up and down. What you will see too is, we'll play it again, but in the beginning, so a very common cue in the squat is to drive your knees out, right? That's not a cue that we use here because I think it misunderstands how we fundamentally want to, again, produce force in a squat. And so if you'll play the video again, what you'll see is, and then will you just pause it, Nicole, when he gets to his heaviest weight? What you see is, on each warm-up set, you can see his knees track out slightly, right? Like this is clearly, I think, something that he's consciously thinking about doing, or it's an ingrained pattern that he's developed. But then as the weight gets heavier and heavier, you will see the knees track in when he goes to push the floor away, right? So, no, yeah, just X out of the, I know, you're doing great, Nicole. So when you just go to this next one. So when the squat's 270, you can even start to see it there, right? But it's his heaviest squat. Will you pause it like a third of the way up? So he sits straight down, right? And then we see his knees come in, right? That is thought to be a bad thing in weightlifting, right? We are always taught to like put bands around the knees, to drive the knees out, to activate the glutes. But the reality is that is a forced propulsion strategy. You are seeing internal rotation at the foot, at the knee, at the hip, at the pelvis, that all in this kind of chain working together to push into the ground to create force. And what we need to create force is this concept of internal rotation. And then you can also like, again, I was gonna do a long conversation about like, oh, his hips are a little bit shifted, right? The right knee is caving in a little bit more than the left. Like, is that a good or a bad thing? There's a longer conversation to be had about that, but the key takeaway is that, again, there's this big like task specificity to movement. So this idea of like you picking or however strong you are, right? Picking the max amount of weight off the floor in a deadlift is going to be different than picking the most amount of weight you can pick off the floor if it were a box, if you were moving, right? Versus also like picking something very light off the floor. Like all of those tasks are very different. They would demand different strategies. And kind of in that context of like where we were talking about technique briefly last time, there are acceptable maybe points of like degradation in technique in the context of the distinct tasks. Does that make sense? Yeah, so that's really what I'm trying to get at is, again, it's just looking at that, again, through the lens of propulsion, through the lens of like task specificity.
So we don't think it's bad,
So we don't think it's bad.
but we don't think it's efficient either.
It's super efficient. It's the most efficient.
Should we still be striving to be able to like hit really high weights without needing to do that?
Do which?
Needing to rely on like the internal rotation.
No. So that is kind of the point of, again, like the first part of this, is to say that internal rotation is the most efficient strategy that all of us, because we are humans, can use to produce force in the ground. And it will look different depending on movement, depending on the joint angles. Like we don't necessarily want to see a knee cave in a deadlift, for example. But in a squat, so there's also a big difference between, so the reason why we think knees in a squat is bad in the first place is because of something called a knee valgus. If you're familiar with that idea, is so a knee valgus is, it's an internally rotated femur on an externally rotated tibia. So this is an ACL tear mechanism. If we're cutting, if we're in sport, like again, that external rotation at the tibia and internal rotation at the femur, that again does place a high degree of like load and stress on the ACL. That is how we tear our ACL. Internal rotation at the tibia coupled with at the tibia and internal rotation at the femur is not dangerous. It's not the same thing, right? It's not a knee valgus. It's not a mechanism of injury. It's also not inefficient. That's the point.
Okay. So it's not something that you would ever like correct in someone's form if they do it.
Most likely not. It depends also. Like a lot of times what we see is if someone has a lot of knee cave, it's a lot of times the adductors trying to get a lot of, or the adductors being, having a lot of leverage. And so it's like, all right, what are our muscles that like produce force to the ground? It's like glutes and adductors, especially in like deep deflection. Those are the muscles that have the best leverage. So like your adductor at the bottom of the squat has one of the, is probably the muscle that has the best leverage to produce force. So a lot of times you will see that knee cave when it is, maybe like when your knees are, when your feet are super wide, you may see it, right? Because the wider the feet are, the more leverage your adductor has in that motion. You also may see a knee cave too, because this is like the fitness industry in a nutshell. Like you keep telling people to drive their knees out, so they start from more of a knees out position, and then they just come back to neutral to produce force. So it's like you're cueing someone to do something that is, again, my kind of basic point is that you're cueing someone to do something unnatural in general, and then you also might see it as a result of like just over cueing in general. Does that make sense? You're giving me a look.
No, I'm taking this in.
Okay.
I'm taking this in. And
Yeah.
I'm thinking of this in terms of, so you're thinking of this in terms of squatting?
Yes.
Okay. And jumping, is that the same thing, or is that you're going to that?
No, it can be. So jumping, again, it's, you can see a lot of jumpers with a ton of knee valgus as they jump. It's that exact same force propulsion strategy. It's internal rotation all the way down the chain that's coupled to produce force as effectively as possible. Let's go to the next slide. So the propulsion arc is, again, it's this idea of like, how do we produce force into the ground? We move through these different zones. So this will also directly correlate to gait, we'll talk about in a second. But we move through early, mid, and late propulsion. Early and late propulsion are characterized by excellent, so I'll say relative external rotation, right? And then mid propulsion is characterized by relative internal rotation. go to the next line, and then we'll come back to this one, the next one after that. So the compression and expansion stuff is when I say like external rotation and internal rotation, I feel like I should define those terms a little bit better too. What I'm saying when I use those terms is they are a bit confusing in the sense that they mean multiple things. So external rotation is fundamentally just like a joint action, right? It's moving away from the body, right? Internal rotation is moving closer to the body. We can think about like hip. Internal rotation is rotation towards the middle. External rotation is rotation away from the middle. This lens, the compression and expansion model, is created by Bill Hartman. It's this model of looking at movement through the idea that there is only internal and external rotation. There is only force propulsion and force absorption, and we see specific joint. Okay.
Choked a little bit. Sorry.
We see joint actions coupled together that fall along in these strategies generally. Are we with me so far?
Yeah, I'm just.
You taking it in?
Yeah.
Yep. So, force propulsion, right? We see that in mid stance in Gait, which we'll come back to. That is, it's pronation at the foot, it's internal rotation. So we're talking about Gait.
Sorry.
We're talking about Gait specifically. It's pronation at the foot, it's internal rotation at the tibia, it's internal rotation at the femur, it's internal rotation at the pelvis, right? It's force propulsion is fundamentally internal rotation. It's just pushing, right? We can also characterize it by, a concentric muscle orientation, right? There's concentric, eccentric, isometric, right? Concentric is the muscle shortening, eccentric is the muscle lengthening, isometric is it's holding the same place. So compression is a concentric orientation. Overcoming is just another word for that idea, like shortening and overcoming the forces being imposed on the system, let's say. So again, muscle shortening is fundamentally like producing enough internal tension to meet the demands of the task so that the muscle is shortening, versus yielding or eccentric is like the opposite, right? It's like the muscle lengthening. It's in a controlled way, but it's not meeting the demands imposed on the system. It's letting the muscles, like letting that origin and insertion further away from each other. If we move back to here, internal rotation, adduction, and extension are also coupled together, right? So shoulder, internal rotation, adduction, and extension are all movements that are coupled together in the sense that for you to extend the shoulder, you need a requisite amount of internal rotation at the shoulder, right? That being said, if you improve someone's internal rotation at their shoulder, you'll also see them be able to improve their ability to extend their shoulder at the same time. With me, Emma?
Theoretically.
This stuff is kind of, again, so it's a little bit like the biggest takeaway is not. It's not to get caught up in the like all the different terms and even the details necessarily. I think the details are important. It's just to understand that like if I keep coming, just come back to the pillar of like efficiency, right? If we are seeing someone deadlift or someone squat or someone do a split squat or a kickstand RDL, or a kickstand hinge or a walking lunge or all these about sprinting or jumping, you'll see a point in the movement where someone is using more of an expansion strategy on the way down. It's more of a lengthening, yielding, expansion driven strategy. And then on the way up, it's a compression strategy. So for a squat, for example, if you go back to the propulsion mark, for a squat, for example, when someone is starting and everything is stacked over one another, the first third of the movement, and this is, again, it's a little bit different, it's a little bit confusing too, but the first third of the movement, we see external rotation. The middle third, we see internal rotation. And then in the bottom third, we see external rotation again.
And then it's going from standing and down into the
To a full squat,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, and so that is generally, again, if you see it, there's different ways to squat. So like this arc, there's different ways to squat, and there's also, I'll say there's different ways to squat. But if we see like what an ideal like squat would look like, it would see joints moving further and further away from each other until generally it's like the middle or the kind of slightly towards the bottom. You'll see we talk about the levers being the furthest away from each other, the knee the furthest away from the hip joint. And then we actually see in a squat, these things come back together towards the bottom. And that's where, like, again, the hardest point in the squat is almost exclusively going to be, again, sometimes it's right out of the bottom, but a lot of times it's like those joints are closer together, so the better leverage to come out of the bottom. And then you see them get to that sticking point, which is right about like the middle or kind of like the bottom, or like right as you transition from like here to here. That's where you see people fail. That's where a squat's the hardest. That's where all the, the woman arms are the longest. It's where you have the worst leverage. It's where you need the most internal rotation, and you need the ability to produce force most effectively in this position of the squat. Yeah. Okay. If we go to the next slide, then we can talk about gait too in the same way, right? So in gait, we see again. You could talk about it. Probably even have the gait, maybe go in a much more detail, but I don't know. Just anatomy of gait.
I mean, I've studied gait on and off for years, but
we talked about some.
yeah, but I love
Yeah.
gait.
So I'm doing a very simplified version, right? Early, mid, and late stance.
Okay.
Early and late are external rotation. We see it characterized by supination at the foot, and then external rotation again at the foot, at the tibia, femur, and the pelvis. Mid stance is where we see relative internal rotation. Again, that is just consistent with this idea of like mid stance is how we push. It's force propulsion. It's displacing the center of mass forward. For right now, that's all I wanted to talk about again. Okay, then let's come back to the compression expansion. So with this idea too, we'll see different. So like a squat is generally more expansive. It's it's characterized by more relative external rotation than something like a hinge or a deadlift. So a hinge again is more compressive. It's you're biasing more internal rotation as you like send your hips backwards in space versus a squat. And this is just ultimately like what space you need to create in the joints. How are the joints moving in the ways that they need to be able to create that movement. We can think of hinges as more like internal rotation and squats as more external rotation. Again, that being said, even in that context, you still need to be able to create internal rotation in a squat to be able to push the floor away and to be able to stand up. It's just relative to a hinge, more expansion driven. Does that make sense?
I'm assuming that.
Sort of.
Yeah.
So we can come back
Yeah.
to all of these things. I feel like there's much more of a discussion we have on these things. And again, this is all like a kind of primer to be able to get us to the point where it's like, well, why are we teaching everyone to push through the middle of the foot? Well, why? It's because we know through Gait that mid stance is how we push the floor away. We know that we can understand that a split squat is just propulsion. So we're cueing people to push through the middle of their foot so that we can create the shape in the foot necessary to be able to produce force and to lift the weight most efficiently, right? That's like again, just coming back over and over again to the idea of efficiency. It's like, how are humans supposed to move? That's the basic idea. Okay. The final kind of like point here is just like joint mechanics generally. Joints covered in synovial fluid. For you to achieve motion around the joint, you need to compress one side, right? You have to shorten, to create tension, to shorten the muscle on one side. And then to get movement, the other side has to expand. The muscle on the opposite side of the joint has to eccentrically orient. It has to yield, it has to lengthen, right? If there's too much tension in my tricep, it doesn't matter how much I squeeze my bicep, I won't be able to get movement around the joint because this is holding on and it won't let me expand on the other side of the joint. So movements that we will do for the goal of mobility, it's about getting expansion on the side of the joint that we want movement for. So it's generally like most mobility work is about reducing muscular tension, and that's where it's like if you want a foam roll, if you want to stretch, if you want to do breathing drills or mobility drills, they can all be really effective. It just goes back to the idea of like, why is it effective? It's because you reduce reducing muscular tension. You're giving your body the space to be able to move.
Totally.
All right. Respiration, this is also just like a fundamental human thing. We want to be able to achieve 360-degree expansion in the ribs. So we want to see the front of the rib cage open up anteriorly. We want to see expansion laterally, and then you can't see it when you're on the floor, but we want to see the posterior side of the rib cage expand as well. So we ideally on each breath are getting full 360-degree expansion. What that would look like is the lower ribs opening up and moving away from each other, and on the inhale, and then on the exhale, closing down. A lot of times what we will see is if people are limited in one of these motions, a lot of times they are limited in like their ability to fully exhale. Oh, that was too quick. I gotta do that video. You see how I get this like big inhale through the chest, and then just pause it there. Stuck, right? Like the lower ribs can't fully descend, and when that happens, you can't get true core activation. I specifically use that term to be triggering to myself. Again, short version of like respiration and like everything that goes on with that, but for the purpose of today, again, it's looking at this through the lens of we want to be able for everything to kind of move, so that we can access motion around the kind of surrounding joints. And a lot of times this kind of touches more on the study of movement variability. A lot of times you'll see them stuck in specific ways, and then they can't train certain parts of their body because they can't access motion around those joints because they're stuck in their rib cage. A lot of people who are super, super tight, it all comes back to this. Them just being super, super tight in their rib cage. Next one. Thank you.
Oh, come on.
All right, so this is the next really like part that we kind of have to get out here for. Center of mass. It's literally just the middle of our body. Why? There's kind of there's like a theoretical and a practical point to this conversation, right? There's a theoretical aspect of it. Epistemologically, how are we looking at movement? Are we looking at it from the perspective of like the muscle is driving the show, or are we looking at it from the perspective of gravity kind of acting on the system, acting in a coordinated way? So probably I'll just zoom in for a second to zoom back out. The best example of this is posture. So a lot of times people with the kind of like sunken shoulder posture, the shoulders, tilted forward, neck stuff, whatever, we'll look at it like, okay, your pecs are tight, right? Your pec, like what does your pec do? It like flexes the shoulder, it adducts the arm, and it internally rotates. So it's like you're in this flexed adducted position. It must be that your pecs are overactive. But it's asking the question of like, why are the pecs tight in the first place? Is it because they are driving the show? The muscle is acting and then your joints are reacting to that? Or is it the opposite? Is it that the joints the muscles react to the position of the joint? I believe much more strongly is that it's the latter rather than the former. Gravity, in the case of posture, gravity is so the task of posture, right, is just holding yourself upright against the domain of gravity, pushing us into the floor. So we see a lot of people with, will you go to the center of mass push forward one?
Wait, before you move on from that.
Yeah.
Like muscle-centric
Yeah.
theory would
Yeah.
say your pecs are tight.
Isn't this still an asm upper cross syndrome?
I'm not doing asm, so I don't know.
Oh, it didn't work.
No, SCI.
So we have this whole procedure.
So I don't know. I haven't read that in a textbook,
Yeah.
but I have been around long enough to hear that. So
Yeah.
for sure, muscle-centric theory on like your posture, how your body physically exists, would say
Yeah.
your pecs are tight. And you're saying like gravity-centric theory would say what?
Gravity-centric theory is looking at in the case of posture, we look at your center of mass is pushed forward in space. So if you look at that, you can't see shit.
I can't drag it.
Yeah, okay. So that's not going to be as helpful. So if we look at just like, my posture is the best example because I have terrible posture. So my pelvis is super anteriorly tilted, right? My center of mass is pushed way forward. And so my weight is more forward on my foot, and my shoulders are rounded forward, my upper back is kind of sitting backwards, everything is kind of slumped over and forward. Not because my pecs are tight or my upper back is weak, but because my center of mass is pushed forward. So why is my center of mass pushed forward? It's because in this specific task, my hamstrings, which posteriorly tilt the pelvis, and my abs, which retract your ribcage, aren't sufficiently strong enough that my body wants to use them as the path of least resistance to hold myself up in space. Rather, my lower back is way stronger, so it contracts to just push everything forward. So you'll see. Go ahead.
Sure, I follow all that, but I'm still trying to figure out like.
So so to sum it up, it's looking at again kind of that concept of like the how do I say that?
Well, like I want like a one sentence. Like if muscle centric theory says your pecs are tight, what is gravity centric? It just means your center of mass is forward.
Yeah, it looks as the center of mass, like the middle of your body, dictating what's happening at the rest of your body. It's kind of an inside out version.
I'm not really following though why like my pelvis being forward and then around my shoulders.
Yeah, so because the pelvis is forward,
Yeah.
because your center of mass is shifted forward, the upper part of your torso has to sit back to balance you out. Otherwise, you would just fall forward, right? If I'm,
I guess I just feel like if my back was the tight, because I have the same posture, so if my back was tight,
so if I'm,
wouldn't it stand to reason that it would be like pulling?
no, so it's your lower back, right?
Lower
It's like
back.
your spinal extensors.
Okay.
So like, this is, okay, I'm not gonna get distracted. Your rhomboids do this,
Yeah.
right? Your lats do this.
Yeah.
Your spinal extensors do this.
Yeah.
Your glutes do that.
Yeah.
Your hamstrings also do that, but then they also do
Yeah.
this. Your abs do this. And they do this. There's different abs, but like the whole idea is like your spinal extensors,
Yeah.
my spinal extensors in this specific task are the ones that is the muscle group that my body prefers to use. So it's the most efficient for this task for my body.
Okay.
So if I really wanted to fix my posture, I would work on strengthening my hamstrings to posteriorly tilt my pelvis, and work on strengthening my abs, like my deep abdominals, to retract my ribcage, to hold my ribs back as it's going.
And since his upper back is a little rounded,
Yeah.
the shoulders forward would be to help balance that out of gravity.
Yeah. It's kind of like, all right, so we see a neutral spine, right, is that S curve to it.
Yeah.
This is like an exaggerated S to balance everything out in the middle.
Okay.
It's does that answer your question? Go ahead, Nicole.
The like muscle centric kind of argument is focusing on like a certain muscle being
Yeah.
tight or a certain, and the gravity centric theory is more like, let's look at where your center of mass is distributed and why is your center of mass distributed that way. Like because of that is resulting in all of these different muscular actions, and then figuring out what we can do to counteract that. So it's just like, I feel like the muscle centric theory is more like we're blaming it all on one muscle
Yeah.
because you're stuck in that position and that's what muscle is the problem. But in reality, it's a bigger picture of your center of mass is shifted forward, back, laterally, whatever it is, and there are multiple different factors acting on that posture that we need to address.
It's looking at a muscle in isolation versus the system as a whole.
Yeah.
It's probably another good way of saying that. You're gonna put it off for 5 minutes. Emily, you got like 5 minutes, or do you have to go?
I have to go. I think I have to go.
Maybe you'll just be listening as you're packing up.
Yeah.
It's really just, again, it's kind of something that I was going to touch on for a long time, but it's there's this phrase like joints act and muscles react. Like the position of the joint will dictate whether the muscle is able to fire or not, versus the other way around.
Okay, the position of the joint will, say that again, one more time?
The
Position of the joint.
position of the joint dictates whether the muscle is able to fire, rather than the other way around.
Okay, this is a super fast question.
Yeah, no, go for it.
Okay, gravity centric and muscle centric, is that particularly relating to like alignment, posture. Maybe these are like say posture.
I asked you in September. Fine. It's all right.
It's basically related to everything.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. That's
Posture was the example that I wanted to use because I think it's
Oh, okay.
a helpful example of understanding what's happening. But it's kind of true of everything.
Okay.
That like how we manage the middle of our body will have a much bigger impact then on which muscles we are using throughout the rest of our
Okay. Okay, that's great. That's super helpful.
Yeah. Did you have another question?
No, that was the question.
Okay. All right. I feel like we were trying to hit on a bunch of different things, so now I'm going to try to like recenter myself. So this is the joints act, muscles react, right? It's kind of looking at this idea of movement and isolation versus movement as a whole system. We don't. Okay, so Jen, have you ever heard the term mind-muscle connection? Mind-muscle connection?
Yes.
So that I think is a very we'll just say outdated phrase,
Okay.
because it's this idea of like, all right, in isolation, I can think about getting my bicep to squeeze as hard as I can to like in a bicep curl, for example. But in a coordinated way, at the bottom of a squat, am I thinking about like squeezing my glutes, or thinking about like squeezing my quads, or squeezing my abductors, or squeezing my glute med enough to stabilize my pelvis, or like, there's like so many different things moving at one time that like when we look at it, when we look at the muscles in isolation, I think it's a lot less helpful than to look at it as an integrated system, especially in dynamic movement. And so it's the difference between two, like an internal versus an external focus. An internal focus again might be on like the muscle itself, on like squeezing the muscle, versus an external focus is squatting in a specific way, or having like
Or connecting to the weights, or
when you say connected to the weight, what do you
well,
say?
or just like I've never done a weighted squat. I've done weighted squats.
Yeah.
Like this.
Yeah.
But or even here, like
Yeah.
like if I sort of am focusing on the load, just feeling the load of the weight, like I feel like that's an external focus. Is that right?
Yeah, certainly. That's definitely an external focus that you could choose. Probably what I would. So if we go back to this idea of propulsion,
Yeah.
the one that I would pick for most people to think about is pushing.
Okay.
Pushing
Okay.
forward,
Gotcha.
right? Like
Gotcha.
that is kind of the theme that orients all of these things together. Is just trying to push the floor away as much as possible. And when you focus on pushing, when you are putting your joints in the right position, the muscle has no other option but to fire as much as it can, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times you will, so muscle activation is another thing that I fundamentally disagree with the concept of, right? And that's this idea of like you have to do exercises that activate certain muscles. When in reality, if you're not feeling your glutes in a deadlift or a hip thrust, you're just not putting them in the correct position to fire,
Okay.
and you have to just adjust your technique at the end of the day.
Okay.
It's not like the glutes don't know how to fire, or the glutes are incapable of it, or you need to do some low-level exercise that drives a lot of awareness to that muscle first. Go ahead.
Okay. Like when people say dead bug syndrome.
Yeah, I don't think that's a thing.
So you're saying, so like my question would be, like because people talk about like particularly like calves and glutes as
Yeah.
with age, you tend to lose the muscle strength. Maybe muscle
Yeah.
strength and activation are two separate things.
Yeah, I would say the different thing.
Okay, so but still in your experience, I mean I feel like a little bit in my experience, I really agree with you, is that yeah, you have to get it into the right position with that would cause the load to activate.
Well, let me ask you this. Did you feel your glutes activating when you kicked stage?
Oh yes. Yeah.
Did we do anything to activate them beforehand?
No.
They were pretty active, right?
Well, and I will say this because like it's been really frustrating. Like when I have with strength training,
Yeah.
my trainer will say like activate your glute at the top of the lunge, and I'm
What
like,
does that mean?
I don't like it. I can't feel like I wrap, So this
Yeah.
is very helpful to me because like I'm like that seems like a wasted cue. It seems like a confusing cue. Okay.
It's not a cue I would use.
Okay.
Also, like at the top of a lunge is think back to resistance profiles that we talked about last week, at the top of a lunge where their joints are stacked on top of each other, there's no load.
Right.
So it's the same, it's what we're talking about with the Romanian deadlift, right?
Right.
There's really no reason to activate or squeeze. I mean, there's really, for the most part, like I almost never use the cues like engage or squeeze or activate.
Okay.
Because if the technique is what we want it to be, those things will happen naturally. They
Okay.
have to happen, right?
Okay.
If they're not, then the technique's not right. Or like I'm sure there are some edge cases where it's like you really have like a super weird motor pattern developed that maybe some kind of like internal awareness that can be helpful for. I'm not saying it would never be something that I would use, but for the vast majority of people, you just get them set up. If we go back to like exercise technique, if you get them set up in the correct way, if you get them doing the proper, like joint actions at the proper speed in the proper directions, like the muscle has no choice but to fire. There's just no other way around it. Does that
Right,
make sense?
yeah, totally. It just is making me think back, and I'll just say this super fast,
Say it,
to,
go for it.
because internally focus was a big thing in Pilates
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah, that's
And now they've started, and
Mm.
we've moved away from it, so it's
Mm.
very interesting. And I heard this great podcast where
Mm.
it was explained beautifully,
yeah.
internal and external focus.
Cool. If you go to the next slide, can you actually
This-
see anything?
Yes.
Okay.
I feel like, oops. I feel like the one on the right you can see much more just because of the shorts. Like
Yeah.
the color.
So
Oh, yeah.
if you can see this, like again, it's hard to tell from a number of different perspectives, but we see the two most common instances in someone's posture of their center of mass being pushed forward, right? On the left, you can see someone in an anterior pelvic tilt, right? Again, it's hard to see, but you kind of have to imagine the curve of their spine kind of curves in this way.
Okay.
Which, baggy shirts always make things more difficult to actually see, but you kind of have to trust me in the sense that, again, having done this enough times, like that's what I'm looking at. And it's so an anterior pelvic tilt, right? It's the front. It's the ASIS is lower than the PSIS, so you've got
Yeah.
a line pointing that way, and then the ribs tend to be a little bit flared, so you've got a line going this way.
And knees sort of hyperextended a tiny bit?
Yeah,
would you say?
totally. Totally. And then if you look on the right, you call that a sway back.
Okay.
So sway back is characterized more by, again, you have to, the baggy shirt is difficult, but you kind of have to imagine
Yep.
his spine underneath the baggy shirt, but his hips are pushed super far forward. And then he's got that kind of arch, but then this big curved back throughout a lot of his upper body. Again, as a product of his hips, of his glutes being super concentrically oriented or super pushed forward, and that's driving the rest of his body to shift backwards a ton, versus the pelvis being tilted forward.
Okay, like I can kind of see this more on this picture here. I mean, I can
Yeah.
really see, and maybe, are you looking for an ideal, like, in this? Like, that's why I guess because like, I also feel like she's a little bit closer to an ideal,
Yeah,
or she's
probably.
not so far off from it?
Yeah.
So, okay, so I'm just saying.
Yeah, and I say this to everyone when we look at their posture, that there's no such thing as good or bad posture, in my opinion.
Uh-huh.
It's just about the point of this exercise is to tell me how they manage their center of mass.
Gotcha.
Right.
Okay. Beautiful.
That being said,
Mhm.
right, like I'm someone who, in the specific task of like posture, don't do a good job managing my center of mass at all. It's not something I particularly care about. In the context of a squat or a deadlift, that's when I think it's more important, right? So
Okay,
this is
gotcha.
a tool that is like leads me down a specific path of
Okay.
like I wonder if X, Y, and Z correlates with this. Oftentimes it does, and more often than not it does, but it doesn't always. And so how someone actually moves in their squat, in their deadlift, in their split squat, how they manage their center of mass in those exercises is way more important. Because those are the exercises that we actually care about, how they're loading their body.
Okay.
Versus how they're standing, we don't care as much. Again, outside of the information that it tells us about their preferred movement strategy.
And then do you have like dancers that come in here and say like, like kind of like because like or so like that's a specific goal.
That's a specific population.
Okay,
That's a
yes,
specific goal, right?
okay.
And that would be a whole another thing, right?
Right.
But I would still want to see them be able to. It's again, another thing I always will say is it's not about like X being good or Y being bad. It's more about the ability to move between them.
Yeah.
And so let's say you had a dancer who, well, like dancers are very upright, right? Like you're very like overextended because you have to be. If a dancer had like a really tight back and they had back pain, would you say that in that context maybe it would be worth trying to introduce some different postures to them, right?
Absolutely.
So like
Yeah.
that's again in the context of like the person in front of you, the demands of the what are their goals, right? It ultimately all stems back to that. Someone's goals will dictate how you look at or the lens through which you look at movement being again not good or bad, but appropriate or inappropriate for what their goals are.
Yeah, and also dancers also could stand like this. I mean, maybe a little less to that
Sure.
person, or maybe a little bit more.
Yeah.
But I'm sure they have all kinds of resting stances, and then
Totally.
when they're animated and have to be, it's a different thing.
Totally.
And depending on what kind of dance they do. So.
100%. And I would still say that most dancers probably need like a really full range of motion around
Yeah.
most joints.
Yeah.
So the other thing that we tend to see often is that people with a worse, like maybe more exaggerated anterior pelvic tilt, or people who have a more exaggerated sway back, tend to be the stiffest. They tend to be the people who end up using their backs for everything.
Okay.
Or they can't show movement around their hips.
Mhm.
And if you stop moving through a joint, then you lose the ability to do that over time. Like that's like just use it or lose it fundamentally. And so another big like to go back to this idea of movement variability is we want to be able to just load different parts of our body as much as possible. And if we lose access to like a range of motion around a specific joint because we stop moving through that joint, then that's a bad thing because then we can't load that tissue anymore. The final thing I'll say on this is a lot of conventional gym exercises involve like a barbell, right? And a lot of people tend to show some kind of like anterior tilt in a back squat, in a deadlift, in a lot of these types of movement. They'll be quite tilted, and those movements will actively encourage that kind of tilt. And then you get in this pattern of being really stuck in that position. You can't, you just really struggle to move through your hips anymore, or you struggle again to differentiate your squats from your hinges. And then you're at the point where you're just loading your spine over and over and over again, to the point where it's not that deadlifts are bad for your back, but if you were to only load your lower back in a deadlift, again, over and over and over again, you might have a hard time recovering. If we go back to our first lecture, that idea of like, there's no such thing as good or bad movement, and like every part of our body is adaptable, but it adapts at different rates. The discs in our back like aren't going to adapt nearly as quickly as even the muscles in our lower back. So like you can break down the muscle, it can recover, but if you're repeatedly like overstressing this, then you can add herniations of this, like that sort of thing, because it's just not able to recover fast.
Gotcha.
Okay, so the next one, the zone of apposition. This is just the neutral spine, right? This is like the ideal. This is ideally what we're looking for in every exercise where we are not trying to move through our spine. Generally, we want something like this. It's a stacked rib cage and lower pelvis. It's lines moving in the same direction rather than that kind of like overextended lines moving in the opposite directions, or lines coming, crossing one another. It's that idea of these parallel lines from the top of the hip, bottom of the rib cage, that they're parallel to one another. And this is just going to be the strongest position for our trunk, the position that allows us to use our abs the most effectively. That goes back to this idea that we touched on briefly of like this idea that muscles are just strongest in their mid-range position rather than being shortened or lengthened. So again, there's like so many muscles that attach to the pelvis, but like the abs, if we are super extended, it means they're in a very lengthened position, and it might be harder for us to recruit them as much. Versus also if we were in a super like hunched position, they would be super shortened, and it would be hard for us to recruit them there as effectively either. So then being in a just a neutral mid-range position means that we put them in a position to be used the most effectively. Right? Same thing with the glutes, right? If we're in an anterior pelvic tilt, the glutes are in this like chronically lengthened position. similar to hamstrings, you might have a harder time effectively using them and or feeling them simply because they're not in the right position. They're not in that mid-range position. Or with that sway back idea, it's like the pelvis is pushed forward a ton. The glutes are super short. They're super concentrically oriented. And so these people have a really hard time lengthening their glutes. And so for a lot of what we're cued to do is like use the glutes, engage the glutes, squeeze your glutes, right? And so you try to get them in this like shortened position over and over and over again. So they get very like used to being short. And they have a really hard time lengthening. And so you can't really effectively use a muscle again when it's like super short all the time.
Right.
And then it's like it's already super short, you're trying to shorten it even more, but you can't shorten a muscle anymore that's already short. You have to lengthen it first before you're able to shorten it. So again, that idea of like activation and feeling again comes back to just muscles being in the right positions to do the job that the task demands of them. Let's go back to, so we looked at the center mass pushed forward. Now we can also see, so we go to the next one and then the one after. We can also see examples of people who are just shifted from one side to the other. So people who just favor more, a more compressive strategy on one side and a more expansive strategy on the other, right? So Dennis, to me, looks more twisted. His right shoulder is lower than his left. His right side of his pelvis looks pushed forward relative to his left. And you can see how the right foot is turned out. He's sitting a lot on the inside edge of his left foot. You can see Dennis and Jasmina, they both have a lot more weight on their left side, but Dennis is more like twisted to the right, at least my interpretation, versus Jasmina is more just sitting on top of the left a little bit more. So these are both just examples of people who are more comfortable putting the majority of their weight on one side versus the other, and they both, right, Dennis struggles in what spots?
Yeah.
Not as much later.
I would say more with hinging.
So maybe it's more interesting. But you'll see a lot of times, again, one of...
Also, you are saying their names, so just be careful of that.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
I feel like we were committed off that way.
I'm not gonna remember, but thanks.
No, the majority of the time, again, not always, but you'll see someone struggle on a unilateral exercise in either a squat or a hinge. Like Jasmina struggled with her split squats, right? Like that was it on her left or her right side? It was her left side. No, it was right.
Well, it's her when her left foot is forward, she struggles with her right hip because of the mobility in her right hip.
Yeah. So this is just like it's an opportunity to be like, oh, there's some imbalance there. There's someone that again wants to use one side more than the other, and generally you see that appear in one form or another. Again, that being said, it's like you would see that either way. So the takeaway oftentimes is not that deep. Honestly, it's kind of like, you know, you will go through all of these different exercises. As we kind of finish the lecture, we'll talk about these movement competencies, and we want to see those movement competencies either way, whether their posture is perfect or terrible. Like you will, how they move again in the exercises that we want them to be good at is the most important thing.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
And then the last one is some examples of clients who are able to hold their center of mass backwards in space really well. So you can see how he's sitting straight down and straight back up. You can see he's struggling in that like bottom third, but everything is just held in place, right? And then he's sitting straight up. If you go to the next one. Again, same idea of like fighting this like arching of the back, things falling forward. Everything is just sitting straight down, straight down, straight down, straight down. That's the one pause. And then back up.
That's great.
And then go to the last one. This is Daniel. Again, we worked a lot on him avoiding this big arch in his lower back. And you can see, I mean, his head is probably not perfect, but it's better since he's shooting his back. He's avoiding, it's as simple as like just avoiding arching your lower back, right? Maintaining the ability to maintain a neutral spine the whole time. That's like a really big component of it. And then in the squat specifically too, it's about holding your center of mass backwards. It's about avoiding falling forward by arching. and avoiding falling forward by hinging too. So it's about doing both of those things. The next one. Oh,
I think this will be better.
the other ones. This is she who shall not be named. What do you want to say?
Client A.
This is client E, who who you could just see how, again, she's like very stiff, and like the lower back is quite arched. You can see she's kind of like forward on the toes and like more, just like stiff and apprehensive generally. And then you can see on the right just how she's like sat back on her heels a little bit more, and just she's got a little bit more of that like apple curve to her spine. And this was just after a couple specific mobility drills. So you can see this is kind of like being pushed forward, and on that side it's much more like held back. Which again, is that good or bad?
They got here, they're walking, they're doing their life.
Yeah. Yeah, it's again, it's neither good nor bad. The reason we did this with client E is client E was talking about just like feeling super stiff and her back was really like
Gotcha.
And so we worked on a couple exercises of facilitating your hamstrings, getting her to breathe in a more like neutral position, more supported position, that then allowed her body that then convinced her body that the most efficient way of standing was one that was using less of the lower back, and that just got that tissue to just relax a little bit because it wasn't working so hard. All right, and then we just again come back to this idea of variability again. We've touched on this a couple times. Again, it's just the ability to use movement strategies, so the ability to compress and expand, and then the ability to load different tissues. So again, really what we're talking about a lot here is just not loading our lower backs over and over again, about being able to load our glutes in their lengthened position, in a short position, quads in a lengthened position, adductors, again, just not being stuck in one position or another. If you look at like take the upper body for example, a lot of like powerlifters, a lot of people just in the gym will like arch their backs a ton when they're doing pressing movements. And so what I see a ton of is people with a really high incline doing shoulder presses, but their back is super arched. And so when you do that, it just limits the amount of shoulder flexion you're actually in. So you end up seeing people do a flat bench, like with dumbbells, and then they'll do push-ups, and then they'll do an incline press, like with the biggest arch you've ever seen. And it's like you're actually just doing like more or less like flat press again, right? Because you arched so much. And it's like, is arching bad in that context? No. But if the goal is to train your delts rather than your chest, then arching is just reducing the angle at which you're pressing, and it's just making it, you're just not hitting that tissue anymore. Some common areas we see people stuck is at the foot, at the pelvis, and at the rib cage. A lot of this comes back to not being able to control your center of mass, right? If your center of mass is pushed forward, so a lot of people when they walk, if you're walking with your center of mass pushed forward a lot, you're walking with this big arch, your weight is shifted forward a lot on your toes, and so you can't access early or mid stance. You're stuck in toe off. You're kind of stuck walking like this. Again, this is like an exaggerated form, right? But you can see it quite a bit. And so when you see people stuck in that position, they can't, again, so like the foot is supposed to go from supination to pronation to supination again. A lot of people then can't access pronation because they're kind of stuck in supination. They're stuck in toe off or lay stance. And then again, at the pelvis, like you see a lot of people who, again, they choose exercises that, from a center of mass perspective, push their center of mass forward. So like a barbell back squat, sitting on your back here, it pushes your center of mass forward. And so people get very stuck. They're like, I don't feel my legs in a squat, for example. They just feel their lower back, right? It's because they're so pushed forward. And then the rib cage too, again, it's another very common thing that people, especially people who are very, very stressed. So if you remember that like short kind of inhalation breath. People who can't fully exhale, they can't fully drop their ribs, they can't fully like close their rib cage. They're stuck in this like short inhalation posture and can't fully exhale. And that's kind of like a parasympathetic sympathetic nervous system thing where you're stuck in that fight or flight. You're stuck in inhalation and you can't sufficiently activate the parasympathetic nervous system enough and like be able to fully exhale, or like vice versa. Without fully exhaling, you don't sufficiently activate your parasympathetic nervous system. And then we talked about some things that, again, we would, the reason this slide exists is because for so many of our specific movements, it's like, oh, I would end up saying the same thing over and over and over again. So rather than do that, we just have this slide here to say that these are like very consistent themes that we look to see for like midfoot pressure is for every lower body closed change exercise, we want to see someone push through the middle of their foot, right? If we look at the nice staggered stance trap bar deadlift, we can see the goal again is like not having the knee shoot back. It's it's pushing forward, right? I keep coming back to that idea because it's just again so central to like understanding the specific cues, the specific joint angles, or not the specific joint angles, but the specific cues, the specific actions at the foot, and I guess the specific joint angles that we want to see. And then if we go to the next one, this is just so neutral spine, full ROM. We just want to use a full range of motion on every exercise that we do. And again, for the vast majority of exercises, but really again, unless we are actively trying to move through our spine, we want to hold a neutral spine. Yeah, that's kind of the crux of this slide. If we go to our last couple slides here, there's how we teach bracing. So we talked about this before,
Right, yeah.
So a brace starts with an exhale. It starts with an exhale to bring your ribs down first, so that you can put your body in a position to be able to use your abdominals, right? A lot of people start with a brace by inhaling, and then you've just, again, you've like expanded the front of your rib cage, but just compressed everything in the back, and so your ribs are just so open that you can't actually use your abs anymore because they're in this very like lengthened position. Versus if you exhale first and then inhale on top of that, it's just puts everything in a much better position to be able to use that musculature. And then the majority of our clients, we're not lifting 1 rep max. Like we're not lifting for 1 to 3 reps. So you certainly could Valsalva, which is where you hold your breath during you would exhale first, inhale, and then on the way down, hold your breath, and then exhale on the way up. For the majority of our clients, it's a better pattern to develop of just that inhale on the eccentric, exhale on the constant.
So you're saying you like in
Yeah, I like this for the vast
exhaling
majority.
on the eccentric. Okay.
Yeah. It's just easy, inhale on the eccentric, exhale on the constant.
Inhale and eccentric. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Is that what you teach as well?
There's a couple of times that I'll switch the breath up, but
Yeah.
usually it's mostly like, I mean, we phrase it a little bit differently, like.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that. I would just say inhale on the way down, exhale on the way up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a whole other, but like the language we use for clients would never be like this, right?
Right.
We're always trying to phrase things and frame things in the ways that our clients will understand.
Right.
But yeah, this is I think like simple enough. And then if you go to our last couple slides, these are really where our programming is kind of based around. So these are there's I don't know if you like I have essential and non-essential. I think they're both important, but just the relative importance. I have these 9 first, and then the following 8 kind of like secondary. These are the ones that it's like if you have 2 hours a week to work out, you really should be doing something from. You should be doing something from all of these categories every day or every week. Let me say. The sagittal plane competency is kind of like it's its own because we spend a lot of time in our warm-ups focused on it, but it also feeds into everything, right? So sagittal plane competency. Sagittal plane competency. Wow.
One more time.
Sagittal plane competency is about just being able to hold the center of mass backwards. It's being able to stay on our heels in a squat versus being pushed forward to the toes. It's about, it's outside of a couple like cueing things in most upper body exercises, it's much easier. Even a push-up, let's say. So to push up, it's the ability to hold a plank the whole time versus having a really big arch in our back, right? It's about controlling the middle of our body so that the extremities can do the work that we want them to. And then the rest are kind of just like, these are the main movement categories that we'll spend the next couple months going over. So bilateral squatting and hinging, single leg squatting and hinging, vertical pressing, vertical pulling, horizontal pressing, horizontal pulling. These are really the exercises or the categories that we draw from to make our strength routines. And really in a week, we just want one of each of these. So it kind of nicely lines up to how we program, which if you go to the next one. There's a day 1 and a day 2, so the majority of our clients are getting some version of this program. I think the beauty in our semi-private sessions, this framework, is that it's very simple. And so we can program quite easily for different people just by varying up the exercises within that category, but the framework stays the same. So in that framework is something to just rebuild some kind of awareness of the middle of our body if they need it. So a lot of clients are eventually trying to move away from exercises like this in the warm-up, or at the very least progress them. And so they kind of warm up again with something for the middle of their body, and then we pair a bilateral hinge with a vertical press, a single leg squat with a horizontal pull. There's nothing like super special to this specific pairing outside of trying to pair back half of one part of our body with front half of the other, and then vice versa, so that there's as little overlap as possible. We're also trying to keep the workout, rather than have all of your lower body be first and then all of your upper body be second, or vice versa, you just pair upper body with lower body both times. And then if you go to number 2, it's just the opposite, right? Now it's, did that move? That was so fast. Then it's a bilateral squat with a vertical pull, and then a single leg hinge with a horizontal press. Okay. That idea of just covering all of those basics. And then for clients who have more of an opportunity within the session or more sessions, then we want to work into some additional patterns that I think are also important, but I just probably wouldn't label them to the same degree of relative importance. We've got spinal flexion and extension stuff, so whether it's abs, rectus abdominis development. We've got trunk lateral flexion and rotation, knee flexion and knee extension without also moving through the hips, so isolating those motions. Hip extension with a shortened bias, so glute bridge, hip thrust kind of deal. And then playing around with the different rate of loading. So plyometrics, very fast rate of loading. Isometrics, very slow rate of loading. Yeah. That's it. That's all I got.
Woo, great.
Much more efficient today.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So.
We're done early.
Yeah, we're done early, and now I hope that I hope we're set up to then go into the details, right? Now we can go into the details of all of these exercises, specific coaching cues, specific goal outcomes for each exercise, specific ways that we want each exercise to look and why we want them to look, while having this background kind of base of information and base of understanding. Again, it's just the whole point of these first 3 was to avoid having the same type of conversation over and over again. It's why are we coaching the squat this way? Well, we coach the squat this way to differentiate it from our hinge as much as possible, right? Because of this concept of movement variability and making sure that we can lower our glutes in their fully lengthened positions, and then have our squats be as different as possible, right? Load as much different tissue as possible. And I think we are hopefully set up to do that now. Yay!
Great.
Okay, any questions? Anything you will leave us with?
No, I
Are
feel
there
really.
any questions you want to go back to? Because I know we went through the first part very fast.
I did start something. Okay, I think it was with Gait, so propulsion strategy. And you made a comment about, I think it might be the one before this. There was something on Gait. Yeah, maybe it was going all the way back to here,
Yeah.
and you said something to the effect, So Gait is I'm assuming Gait is a propulsion strategy.
Gait is the propulsion strategy.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Gait is the propulsion strategy that we base our understanding of how we propel ourselves forward, how we displace our center of mass from.
Okay.
Yeah. That is where, like, why do we know that we need pronation and internal rotation to create force? It's from our understanding of Gait.
Okay.
Right? Not necessarily the other way around.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that's why we're using Gait as a frame of reference in the first place. It's to kind of like tie those things together.
Great. And no, I think this feels pretty like this all makes a lot of sense.
Cool.
I mean, I might have more questions later, but this. Okay, once
Yeah.
I think the zone of apposition.
Yeah.
There were three skeletons. The one on the right. Okay, yeah. So the zone of apposition. So what's sort of like the difference between the first and the second?
1 and 2 are the same. Yeah.
That's what I thought. Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
That's great.
I don't know why they are different.
Okay, that's helpful because I was like, oh, it's like zone of apposition, one thing, and then optimal. Oh, optimal zone of apposition.
Yeah, I don't know why this is.
Okay.
Zone of apposition is a PRI term, by the way, postural restoration. Incorporation. Not.
Postural
Just PRI.
PRI.
Oh my god.
Okay.
I wanna say-
Postural restoration.
Yes.
Regardless. If the term neutral spine makes more sense than just
Okay.
right? It's really looking at these two,
Yeah.
where you can see this one again. It's just like open up,
Yeah.
right? His
Yeah.
ribs are just very extended.
Right.
Compared to being pulled down or
Mhm.
pinned down. So we
Uh-huh.
can really put your abs in position to produce force
Yeah.
isometrically the most.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay. No, this is great.
Cool. All right.